I shouldn't have looked at him. Not when Elwin was already angry. The moment the council doors shut behind us, his hand caught my wrist and pulled me into the dark hallway beside the throne chamber. My back hit the stone pillar hard enough to steal my breath. "You embarrassed me," he said softly. That tone was worse than shouting. The palace torches flickered across his face. Sharp jaw, rain-damp black hair. Those cold royal eyes fixed entirely on me like I was a problem he couldn't solve. I forced out a laugh even though my heartbeat was spiraling. "You looked jealous." His grip tightened. For one terrifying second, I thought he'd finally lose control. Instead, Elwin leaned closer. Close enough that I could feel his breath near my ear. Close enough that my stomach twisted itself into knots. "You flirt with everyone," he murmured. "Then act surprised when they look at you." The butterflies in my chest turned violent. I hated this, the way he could stand perfectly calm while my thoughts fell apart around him. "So what if they do?" I whispered. His eyes lowered briefly to my mouth before snapping back up again. That tiny movement nearly ruined me. Outside, music echoed from the royal banquet. Laughter, glasses clinking, an entire kingdom moving on like nothing was happening. Meanwhile, I was trapped in the dark with the prince who looked at me like he wanted to either protect me or destroy me. And honestly, I didn't know which answer scared me more. Throne of love and vows. The first time I saw Prince Elwin up close, he looked disappointed in me. Not angry, not annoyed, disappointed, which somehow felt worse. "You're late," he said without looking up from the report in his hands. Rainwater dripped from my sleeves onto the polished floor of the royal library. I'd sprinted across half the palace after getting dragged out of bed by a servant who claimed the crown prince specifically requested me. Requested. As if I was some loyal knight instead of the academy troublemaker he spent half his time glaring at. "I came, didn't I?" I muttered. That finally made him lift his eyes. Big mistake. Elwin always looked unfair in dark rooms. Candlelight sharpened everything about him. Silver buttons, black uniform, pale fingers resting against parchment. Calm and perfect like one of those royal portraits nobles worshipped. Meanwhile, I looked like I'd survived a street fight. His gaze swept over me slowly. Wet hair, untied collar, mud on my boots. My stomach flipped embarrassingly hard. "You smell like smoke," he said. I was busy. With what? Living a life interesting enough to talk about. A guard near the doorway choked back a laugh. Elwin's expression stayed unreadable, but I caught the tiny twitch near his jaw. That was the problem with him. You had to search carefully to notice when he was affected. But once you noticed, you couldn't stop. The prince closed the report and stood. Every instinct in me straightened automatically, which irritated me immediately after. He walked closer. One step, then another. The library suddenly felt too warm. "You skipped sword practice." His voice stayed calm. "Again. I bruise easily. You lost to a first-year student. That child fights like a starving raccoon." Elwin stopped directly in front of me. Close. Way too close. The scent of rain and cedar clung to his clothes, clean and cold enough to make my head spin. I hated how aware I became around him. Every glance, every shift in his breathing, every movement of those elegant hands. "You joke when you're nervous," he said quietly. "I joke when people bore me." His eyes narrowed slightly. Victory. Tiny, pathetic victory, but still. Then his fingers caught my chin before I could react. My breath disappeared. Not rough, not gentle either. Just firm enough to keep me still. "You should learn when to stay quiet," Elwin murmured. Butterflies exploded violently in my stomach. I stared at him, suddenly aware of every inch between us. The dark library, the thunder outside, the fact that the future king of the kingdom was touching me like he'd forgotten anyone else existed. Then the doors slammed open. "Your Highness," a royal advisor said urgently, stopping dead the moment he saw us. Elwin let go immediately. Too immediately. Something unreadable flashed across his face before the cold prince mask returned. "The council is waiting," the advisor said carefully. For a second, Elwin didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on mine. And somehow, that felt far more dangerous than if he'd kissed me. I avoided Elwin for 3 days. Not because I was scared of him. I told myself that at least 7 times while hiding behind a bookshelf in the Academy archive, waiting for the prince's footsteps to disappear down the corridor. Coward. The worst part was that I could still feel his fingers under my chin. Every time I thought about it, my stomach twisted painfully. "You look sick," my friend Kaylin said, dropping into the seat across from me during lunch. "I'm dying." "That obvious?" I groaned into the table. The dining hall buzzed with noble students pretending not to stare at the royal guards stationed near the entrance. Whenever Elwin appeared anywhere on campus, the atmosphere changed instantly. Quieter, tighter, like everyone stopped breathing at once. Unfortunately for me, I noticed him before I even looked up. Black uniform, silver crest, cold eyes already fixed directly on me from across the hall. My pulse stumbled. Kaylin followed my stare and immediately muttered, "Oh, that explains everything. Shut up. The prince has looked ready to kill someone for 3 days. He always looks like that." "No," Kaylin said carefully. "Usually he looks like he wants to kill everyone. This feels specific." I kicked him under the table. Hard. Elwin started walking toward us. Every conversation nearby lowered instantly. Great. Wonderful. Exactly what I needed. I grabbed my tray to leave, but a gloved hand landed beside it first. "Sit." That single word sent heat crawling up my neck. I looked up slowly. "Do princes normally stalk people during lunch?" Elwin ignored the question. "You missed yesterday's strategy meeting." "I also missed you terribly." Kaylin made a strangled noise and immediately stood up. "Actually, I just remembered I have somewhere else to be." Traitor. The seat across from me scraped as Elwin sat down instead. Now everyone in the dining hall was definitely staring. I stabbed my food aggressively. "You're ruining my reputation. You never had one." I hated how fast that made me grin. Elwin noticed. Of course he noticed. His gaze lingered on my face for half a second too long before he looked away again. That tiny pause hit me harder than it should have. "Why are you avoiding me?" he asked quietly. Straight to the heart. No warning. I swallowed carefully. "You imagine things, Your Highness. You stopped speaking whenever I entered a room. That sounds peaceful for everyone involved. You skipped training. I dislike sweating." His eyes narrowed slightly. God, he looked unfairly attractive when irritated. The realization nearly killed me. "You're doing it again," Elwin said. "Doing what?" "Looking at me like you're about to cause problems." Butterflies erupted violently in my stomach. I leaned back in my chair slowly, pretending confidence I absolutely did not feel. "Maybe you're the problem." Silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. The entire dining hall felt too warm. Then Elwin stood abruptly. For one horrifying second, I thought I'd finally pushed him too far. Instead, he leaned down beside my ear, close enough for his voice to brush against my skin. "If you keep staring at me like that," he murmured, "someone will notice." Then he walked away, leaving me frozen in my chair while my heartbeat completely betrayed me in front of half the academy. By the end of the week, rumors started spreading. Not about me, about Elwin. Apparently the crown prince had rejected 2 noble daughters, insulted a duke during court, and nearly started a political argument at dinner because someone mentioned marriage alliances, which would have been entertaining if he hadn't spent the entire dinner staring directly at me across the royal table. I nearly choked on my wine the 3rd time it happened. "Stop looking at him before you combust," Kaylin whispered beside me. "I'm trying." "You're failing." Spectacularly. The royal banquet hall glittered with gold chandeliers and polished marble, nobles laughing too loudly while servants moved between tables. Somewhere near the musicians, aristocrats were dancing gracefully. Meanwhile, I was trapped under the prince's gaze like prey. Elwin looked beautiful tonight. I hated that thought immediately. Dark formal uniform, silver embroidery, black gloves covering elegant hands that rested calmly beside his wine glass while powerful men twice his age listened to every word he said. And somehow, despite being surrounded by half the kingdom, his attention kept returning to me. Butterflies swarmed violently in my stomach every single time. Rayon. I snapped out of it. A noblewoman smiled at me from across the table. You seem distracted tonight. Before I could answer, another voice cut in smoothly. He usually is. Elwin. The entire table went quieter. The prince hadn't even turned toward us fully, but the pressure of his attention hit like a blade against my throat. I forced a careless grin. Your Highness sounds strangely observant tonight. And you sound reckless tonight. The tension between us sharpened instantly. Someone nearby laughed nervously. Kalen looked seconds away from passing out. I should have stopped there. Instead, because my survival instincts clearly hated me, I leaned back in my chair and smiled lazily at the noblewoman beside me. Forgive me, I told her warmly. You were saying something before I was so rudely interrupted. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Elwin's jaw tighten. Oh, that was dangerous. The noblewoman giggled softly, clearly pleased by the attention. I was asking if you planned to attend the Moon Festival tomorrow. I attend anything involving free food. She laughed again, and suddenly the prince stood. The movement silenced half the table instantly. I need air, Elwin said coldly. Without another word, he walked toward the balcony doors. The second he disappeared outside, the atmosphere loosened again. Kalen slowly turned toward me. You are either incredibly brave, he whispered, or deeply stupid, probably both. I stared toward the balcony doors before I could stop myself. Cold night wind slipped through the curtains. My chest tightened strangely. Then, against all logic, I stood up too. Kalen grabbed my sleeve. Rayon, I'm just getting air. With the prince. I ignored him and walked outside before my common sense could physically restrain me. The balcony was dark except for moonlight. Elwin stood near the stone railing with his back to me, city lights glowing below the palace cliffs. Wind moved through his dark hair gently, carrying the scent of rain and winter flowers. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then, you flirt with people when you're upset. His voice came out quiet, controlled. I swallowed carefully. You monitor my flirting habits now? You were touching her hand. Jealousy. The realization hit so suddenly my heartbeat stumbled. I stepped closer before I could think better of it. Why do you care? Elwin turned slowly. Moonlight caught the sharp edge of his expression. You really don't understand? He asked softly. Butterflies crashed violently through my stomach. No one had ever looked at me the way he did right then. Like wanting me was both a weakness and a war. I should have walked away. Any smart person would have. Instead, I stepped closer to him. The balcony suddenly felt too small. Cold night air, distant music from the banquet hall. The city glowing far below us while Elwin stood there looking at me like I'd become the only dangerous thing in his kingdom. You're staring again, I whispered. His eyes didn't leave mine. You noticed. Butterflies slammed violently against my ribs. I hated how calm he sounded while my thoughts completely unraveled around him. You still haven't answered my question, I said carefully. Why do you care who touches my hand? For one long second, Elwin said nothing. Wind moved through the curtains behind us. Then the prince stepped forward. Close enough that I could feel warmth through the layers of my formal clothes. Close enough that one more inch would become something impossible to explain. Because, he said quietly, they look at you like they're allowed to have you. My breath caught. That was not a normal answer. I forced out a shaky laugh anyway because panic and flirting were apparently the same instinct for me now. Your Highness sounds possessive tonight. His jaw tightened instantly. The reaction shot straight through me. You think this is amusing? Elwin asked softly. No, I admitted before I could stop myself. The honesty surprised both of us. The music inside the ballroom swelled faintly behind the glass doors, but out here everything felt suspended. The silence, the tension, the terrifying awareness of his gaze lowering briefly to my mouth before returning to my eyes again. I shouldn't have noticed that. I definitely shouldn't have liked it. Elwin, I said quietly. The prince went still at the sound of his name without the title. Nobody called him that. Not servants. Not nobles. Not even most of the royal court. But I did. And somehow that felt intimate in ways I wasn't prepared for. His expression changed slightly. Softer. More dangerous. "Say it again," he murmured. Butterflies erupted so hard I thought I might actually die. I swallowed carefully. "You're impossible. That wasn't what I asked for." I should have stepped back. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was while the future king looked at me with enough restrained hunger to make my entire body warm. Then voices echoed from inside the ballroom. Nobles approaching the balcony. Elwin reacted instantly. His hand caught my waist and pulled me sharply into the shadows beside the stone pillar. I hit his chest with a startled breath. Now there was no space between us at all. My heartbeat turned catastrophic. Outside the hidden corner, two nobles stepped onto the balcony laughing softly, completely unaware of us concealed in darkness only feet away. Meanwhile, I was trapped against the prince's chest, trying not to visibly lose my mind. Elwin's arm stayed around my waist. Firm, protective, possessive. Every breath I took filled with cedar, rain, and him. "You're shaking," he whispered near my ear. I wanted to blame the cold. Unfortunately, both of us knew that would be a lie. The nobles stayed on the balcony far too long. Every second trapped against Elwin felt dangerous in a completely different way now. I could hear their conversation clearly. Complaints about court politics, marriage alliances, rumors spreading through the capital. But the words blurred together because all my attention was painfully fixed on the prince holding me in the dark. His hand still rested against my waist. Not moving, not letting go either. I was very aware of that. "Elwin," I whispered carefully, "if you keep holding me like this, I'm going to start assuming things." His breath brushed near my temple. "What things?" Butterflies exploded violently. I hated this. No, worse, I loved this. The realization nearly destroyed me. Outside our hiding place, one of the nobles laughed loudly, and instinctively I shifted closer into Elwin's chest to avoid being seen. Big mistake. The prince went completely still. Oh no. My heartbeat spiraled instantly when I realized what I'd done. One of his gloved hands tightened slightly at my waist while the other braced against the stone wall beside my head, trapping me there without force. "You're nervous tonight," he murmured. "You're very tall and very emotionally confusing." For the first time all evening, I felt his body shake with quiet laughter. The sound hit me harder than it should have. Because Elwin almost never laughed. Not in public. Not around the royal court. Not around anyone. But here, hidden in the shadows with me pressed against him, he did. The nobles finally left the balcony a moment later. Neither of us moved. The silence afterward felt heavier somehow. Slowly, dangerously slowly, I lifted my head. Bad idea. Elwin was already looking down at me. Moonlight slipped across the sharp lines of his face, softening nothing. His expression had that same terrifying restraint again, like he was holding back words he shouldn't say, or actions he shouldn't want. My stomach flipped violently. "You can let go now," I whispered. Instead, his thumb brushed once against my side through the fabric of my clothes. Tiny movement, catastrophic effect. "You're blushing," he said quietly. "I hate you." "No," Elwin murmured, eyes lowering briefly to my mouth again. "You don't." The butterflies in my chest turned unbearable. For one reckless second, I thought he might actually kiss me. And somehow, I knew I would let him. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elwin in the dark balcony shadows. The way he looked at me, the way his hand tightened at my waist when I moved closer without thinking. And worst of all, the way I wanted him to do it again. By morning, I was already exhausted. "Rayon," Kalen said slowly as I collapsed face first onto the academy lunch table. "You look like you committed several crimes." "I might have." "That's not reassuring." I groaned into my arms. The dining hall buzzed around us, sunlight pouring through tall windows while students argued over lessons and upcoming royal ceremonies. "Normal," Everything felt painfully normal while my brain replayed last night every 5 seconds. Then the room went quiet. I didn't even need to look up. Elwin had arrived. My pulse reacted immediately, traitorous and humiliating. The prince walked through the hall surrounded by royal guards, dark uniform immaculate as always. Conversations lowered automatically around him. But his attention, straight to me, butterflies detonated in my stomach. Kalen noticed and immediately whispered, "Absolutely not. Whatever this thing is between you two, I refuse to be involved when it explodes." "There is no thing, Rayon. There is a very small thing." Before Kalen could answer, someone else slid into the empty seat beside me. Lady Seraphine. Beautiful, noble, dangerous, great. "I was hoping to see you today," she said warmly. I blinked. That sentence has never once been spoken sincerely to me. She laughed softly. Across the room, Elwin's expression went completely unreadable, which was somehow worse than anger. Seraphine leaned slightly closer. "Will you accompany me during the festival tonight?" I nearly choked on air. Around us, several students immediately started pretending not to listen, because apparently public humiliation was my destiny. She's asking because her father wants royal attention." The entire table froze. Elwin had crossed the hall without me noticing. That alone was terrifying. The prince stood beside the table now, gaze fixed entirely on Seraphine. Calm, polite, cold enough to frost glass. The noblewoman straightened slightly. "Your Highness, you should choose someone else," Elwin said smoothly. My stomach flipped hard. Seraphine blinked. "And why is that?" Then Elwin looked directly at me. "Oh no. Oh, absolutely not. Because," the prince said quietly, "Rayon already belongs to the royal household tonight." Silence. Complete, devastating silence. Kalen looked seconds away from ascending into another dimension. Meanwhile, my brain completely stopped functioning. Seraphine slowly turned toward me. "You belong to the prince?" "I don't know," I blurted immediately. Elwin's mouth twitched slightly. That tiny, almost smile ruined me instantly. The prince stepped closer until his shoulder nearly brushed mine. "You forgot," he said softly, eyes still locked on me. "The king assigned you to assist me during the moon festival." That was technically true. It was also definitely not the real reason he interrupted. And judging by the dangerous look in his eyes, he knew I'd figured that out. The moon festival filled the palace gardens with gold light and music, but I barely noticed any of it, because Elwin hadn't left my side once. Every noble in the kingdom had probably noticed by now. "You're staring again," I muttered as we walked beneath glowing lanterns. "You're nervous again," he answered calmly. "I'm nervous because half the court thinks I've been kidnapped by the crown prince." His mouth twitched faintly. That tiny reaction sent butterflies crashing through my stomach. The gardens shimmered with silver fountains and flower petals drifting through warm night air. Somewhere nearby, dancers spun beneath strings of lanterns, while musicians played soft violin melodies. Romantic, suspiciously romantic, which meant I absolutely needed to panic. "Elwin," I whispered carefully, "why did you tell Seraphine I belong to you?" He stopped walking. The sudden silence between us felt heavier than the music around us. Then he turned toward me slowly. "Did that bother you?" "Yes," I admitted. Something unreadable flashed in his eyes. "Good." My heartbeat nearly failed. Before I could respond, laughter echoed nearby. A group of young nobles approached the garden path, clearly heading toward us. Without thinking, Elwin caught my wrist and pulled me away from the lights, into the quieter greenhouse hidden behind the palace gardens. Warm air wrapped around us instantly. Moonlight spilled through glass ceilings onto rows of white flowers and climbing ivy. The distant festival music became soft and blurred. Now it was just us again, which was somehow worse. "You keep dragging me into dark places," I whispered. "You keep following me." Fair point. I opened my mouth to argue, but Elwin stepped closer first. Close enough to steal every coherent thought from my brain. "You asked why I said you belonged to me," he murmured. Butterflies erupted violently. Yes. His gaze lowered briefly to my mouth again, that same dangerous glance that always made my chest tighten. Then his fingers brushed lightly against my jaw. Gentle this time, careful, like he was giving me the chance to move away. I didn't. I hate when other people touch you, Elwin admitted quietly. The confession hit harder than any flirtation ever had. My breath caught completely. For once, the prince looked uncertain. Not cold, not untouchable, just honest. And somehow that made him infinitely more dangerous. Elwin, I whispered. His eyes searched mine for one silent second before he leaned in. The kiss was soft at first. Warm lips against mine, hesitant only for a heartbeat before the tension between us finally snapped. My stomach flipped so violently I thought I might collapse right there among the flowers. I grabbed the front of his uniform without thinking. Elwin made the smallest surprised sound against my mouth before one hand settled carefully at my waist again, pulling me closer. Everything blurred after that. The music outside, the lantern lights, the entire kingdom beyond the greenhouse walls. There was only him. Only the way my heartbeat spiraled every time he kissed me like he'd wanted to for far too long. Then suddenly, Elwin, a voice echoed somewhere outside the greenhouse. We broke apart instantly, both breathing too fast. The prince rested his forehead briefly against mine, eyes still half-lidded and dangerously focused. And somehow, that look felt even more intimate than the kiss itself. The walk back from the greenhouse was unbearable. Not because Elwin spoke, because he didn't. The prince walked beside me through the lantern-lit gardens in complete silence, hands clasped behind his back like he hadn't just kissed me hard enough to rearrange my entire nervous system. Meanwhile, I was actively dying. You could at least pretend to regret it, I muttered. Elwin glanced at me calmly. Do you? Butterflies attacked my stomach again. That's not the point. It seems exactly like the point. I hated how steady he sounded while my thoughts still felt tangled around him. Before I could answer, voices echoed ahead on the palace steps. Nobles, guards, court officials, and Lady Seraphine. The moment she noticed us approaching together, her gaze sharpened immediately. Interesting. Dangerous. Elwin, an advisor called urgently, walking toward the prince. The council meeting cannot wait any longer. The prince's expression cooled instantly back into the future king everyone feared. It was strange watching it happen in real time. 1 second he was the boy who kissed me breathless in a greenhouse. The next, untouchable royalty. I'll return shortly, Elwin said. To me, not the advisor, not the nobles waiting nearby. Me. Then he walked away, and somehow the gardens immediately felt colder. Seraphine stepped beside me once the prince disappeared into the palace. You look devastated. I look confused. You look kissed. I nearly choked. She laughed softly at my expression before her voice lowered. Be careful, Rayon. The teasing disappeared from her eyes completely. The court watches everything, she said quietly. And the prince has never looked at anyone the way he looks at you. My heartbeat stumbled painfully. Before I could answer, movement near the palace entrance caught my attention. Elwin had paused halfway up the stairs. Even surrounded by guards and officials, he was looking back at me, like leaving me alone for even a moment irritated him. The butterflies returned instantly. Seraphine noticed too. Oh, she whispered. You're both in trouble. Everything changed after that. Not publicly. The court still saw the same cold crown prince and the same reckless academy troublemaker who argued too much. The palace still glittered with banquets and political games and smiling nobles pretending not to notice tension curling beneath every conversation. But privately, Elwin stopped pretending. His hand would settle against my back when crowded halls became too loud. His eyes searched for me first in every room. Sometimes I'd catch him staring when he thought I wasn't looking. Expression softer than a prince's had any right to be. And every single time, butterflies. Violent, unbearable butterflies. Which meant I was completely doomed. The problem was that the kingdom had started noticing too. People are talking, Kalen warned one afternoon. We sat beneath the academy courtyard arches while rain poured beyond the stone pathways. Students rushed past us carrying books and cloaks, but his voice stayed low. The nobles think the prince is obsessed with you. I laughed weakly. That sounds dramatic. Kalen stared at me, then slowly raised an eyebrow. Fair. I groaned and dropped my head against the table. Because the worst part? He was obsessed. And somehow so was I. That night the palace held another royal gathering. Smaller this time, more dangerous somehow. Political families from neighboring territories filled the halls, dressed in silver and velvet, while musicians played softly beneath crystal chandeliers. Elwin stood near the throne speaking to foreign nobles when I arrived, and immediately looked at me. Of course he did. His attention hit like physical pressure now. Heavy, focused, impossible to ignore. One of the visiting nobles noticed. A young lord from the Western Territory stepped beside me with an easy smile. You must be Rayon. Oh, I've heard quite a lot about you, he continued. That's concerning. He laughed warmly. May I steal you for a dance? Across the ballroom, Elwin went still. My pulse spiked instantly. The smart answer would have been no. Unfortunately, my survival instincts had abandoned me weeks ago. Sure, I said. The Western Lord guided me toward the dance floor just as music swelled through the ballroom. And from the edge of the crowd, I felt Elwin watching the entire time. The dance itself was harmless. Too harmless. The noble kept smiling at me, talking casually while my attention stayed painfully fixed on the prince standing near the throne with a wine glass untouched in his hand. His expression had gone terrifyingly calm. That was never a good sign. You keep looking at the crown prince, my dance partner observed lightly. I value my survival. That bad? You have no idea. The song ended. The second it did, a gloved hand closed around my wrist. The ballroom went silent nearby. Elwin. The prince didn't even look at the Western Lord. Leave. Not loud. Worse. Quiet. Controlled. The noble wisely disappeared immediately. Now it was just us standing beneath hundreds of glittering lights while nobles openly stared from every direction. Elwin. Come with me. No room for argument. Butterflies exploded violently anyway. The prince pulled me through the ballroom, through endless palace corridors, until he finally shoved open the doors to an empty royal chamber. The moment the doors slammed shut behind us, you danced with him on purpose. His voice was low now, dangerous. I crossed my arms defensively even while my heartbeat spiraled. Maybe I wanted attention. You already have mine. The answer came instantly. Too instantly. Silence crashed between us. Rain hit the windows outside while candlelight flickered across Elwin's face. He looked furious, jealous, unsteady in a way I'd never seen before. And somehow, that affected me just as badly. You don't get to act possessive whenever someone looks at me, I whispered. The prince stepped closer. You think this is possessiveness? Every instinct in me screamed danger. But I stayed exactly where I was. Elwin. His hand caught my jaw gently but firmly. Eyes locked onto mine with enough intensity to make breathing difficult. I have spent weeks trying to act rational around you, he said quietly. And you keep making that impossible. Butterflies shattered through my chest. Then his forehead rested briefly against mine. And in the softest voice I'd ever heard from him, you're going to ruin me, Rayon. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. You're going to ruin me, Rayon. The words stayed trapped between us in the dim candlelight, impossibly soft coming from someone like Elwin, the future king, the untouchable prince everyone feared. Ruined by me? My chest tightened painfully. Elwin, I whispered. His hand remained against my jaw, thumb barely moving like he was resisting the urge to touch me more. Outside, thunder rolled across the palace sky while rain streaked the tall windows. Everything felt too close, too warm, too dangerous. You shouldn't say things like that, I murmured weakly. Why? Because I start believing them. Something in his expression cracked. Not fully. Just enough for me to finally see how exhausted he looked beneath all that royal control. I don't know how to do this, Elwin admitted quietly. The confession shocked me more than anger ever could. You control everything. Not this. Butterflies erupted violently again. I hated how easily he could destroy me with honesty now. The prince stepped back slightly, finally releasing my face before dragging a hand through his dark hair. Frustration radiated off him in waves. The court already suspects, he said. My advisors watch who I speak to. My father expects me to marry for the kingdom. Reality crashed down hard between us. Not just stolen kisses in greenhouses anymore. Not hidden touches in dark hallways. This was a prince, a crown, kingdom, and me. Suddenly I understood why Elwin always looked tense whenever someone saw us together. You could stop this, I said quietly. The moment the words left my mouth, his eyes snapped toward me. Cold fear twisted in my stomach. Not because he looked angry, because he looked hurt. You want me to? He asked softly. No. The answer came so fast it terrified me. I looked away first. Mistake. Elwin crossed the distance between us immediately. Look at me. My heartbeat spiraled. I obeyed anyway. The prince stared down at me with something dangerously close to desperation hidden beneath all that control. You think I can go back to pretending? He asked quietly. After you. Butterflies crashed violently against my ribs. His fingers brushed my wrist this time, softer than before, almost careful. I know what people would say about you if this became public, he continued. I know what they would call you. The weight of that hit hard. Because I knew too. The court would destroy me long before they ever questioned the prince. Elwin. But I still can't stay away from you. Silence. Heavy, aching silence. Then voices echoed faintly outside the chamber doors. Guards approaching. Reality returning. Elwin's jaw tightened instantly. The prince's mask slid back into place piece by piece, though his hands still hadn't let go of mine. I have to attend the council meeting, he said quietly. And I should probably stop causing you political disasters. A faint, exhausted smile appeared briefly on his face. That became impossible the moment you walked into my life. Butterflies. Again. Always him. Then suddenly, a sharp knock hit the chamber doors. Your Highness, a guard called from outside. The king is asking for you. Elwin went completely still. Something about the silence that followed made my stomach twist. Because for the first time since this started, the king was involved. The council chamber doors slammed shut behind me. Elwin looked up from the throne platform immediately, silver crown slightly crooked from hours of arguments with nobles. Even exhausted, he still carried that cold royal presence that made everyone else nervous. Everyone except me. You ignored my messages, I said, walking straight toward him. The advisors nearby froze. No one spoke to the crown prince that way. Elwin's eyes darkened slightly. Leave us. The entire chamber emptied almost instantly. The moment the doors closed, silence swallowed the room. I stopped directly in front of his throne. You've been avoiding me all day, I murmured. I've been ruling a kingdom, and yet you still had time to glare at every person who spoke to me. Butterflies twisted violently in my stomach when his jaw tightened. Caught. For once, the prince looked irritated instead of composed. You enjoy provoking me, Elwin said quietly. I stepped between his knees where he sat on the throne. Dangerous move. Very dangerous. But his gaze dropped to my face so intensely that confidence rushed through me anyway. Maybe, I whispered. I enjoy seeing you lose control. The room went completely still. Elwin leaned back slowly against the throne. Eyes fixed on mine with restrained tension barely held together beneath his calm expression. You have no idea what you're doing to me, he murmured. I reached up and loosened the black gloves from one of his hands, fingers brushing his wrist intentionally slowly. The prince inhaled sharply. Victory. Tiny. Dangerous. Addictive victory. See, I whispered near his ear. The great Prince Elwin, listening to me so obediently. His hand suddenly caught my waist. Firm. Possessive. But he still looked up at me from the throne with that same dangerous hunger hidden behind royal composure. And somehow, That made my heartbeat spiral even faster. Thank you for watching and supporting.